in here. Had to figure out how to get the live stream working. Sorry it took a minute. Basically I'm doing it this week because the first 2 weeks in July I was just too busy. So here we are now. So if there's anything that you'd like to hear, just let me know. I'm having to sit kind of more vertically in the car because it's raining slightly, so I have to have the windows up. But if you have a song that you'd like to hear, please request it. And otherwise, I'm just gonna get the live stream started the way I always do. Hold on 1 second. Let me tilt that down so that you can see the bass a little bit more, because I can't hold it up as much as I like to. Okay, here we go. All right, hey everybody, I'm gonna scoot this back up now. Welcome to UBass Live. If you have any questions, just let me know. If there are any bass lines you'd like to hear, let me know in the chat as well. I'm once again coming at you from the car because I think it's just slightly better. I think it stopped raining now, so I might be able to crack the windows a little bit. But I'm gonna leave them mostly up this time, so I can't have the bass quite as horizontal as you can hear from me hitting the window. But if there's something you'd like to hear, just let me know, and I'll be happy to play it if I can. And if you have any questions just about the UBass in general, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer questions as well. Okay, so this July has been just kind of a normal month, but I have been out of town the last week and the week before. I had a July 4th gig, so because of that I didn't get the live stream up as soon as I normally do, but here we are. I may have to roll that window up just because there's lots of noisy vehicles. All right, so I've got the Exotic Mahogany bass with me, and this has the Kala round wound strings. So if you're wondering what kind of strings I'm using for these videos, and this live especially. This one is the Exotic Mahogany model with the round wound strings. And these round wound strings could really use replacing. They've been on here since I've had this instrument. And I'm not sure if it's coming through in the video, but if you look at every single fret, there are wear spots on there, so you can tell where the fret has worn through the silver coating and so you're just seeing the coating under, or the string underneath. And that's happened basically at almost every fret on a lot of these strings. But for some reason they still sound good. I believe they're over 5 years old at this point, so they held up really, really well. So hopefully the new ones hold up as well as these did, because they're still pretty good. They still have a little bit of sound to them. You can still get harmonics out of it, and it still has a pretty bright tone. But yeah, this is the exotic mahogany model. A lot of times you'll see me playing the red U-bass on there. That one's the Journeyman model, and I have flat wound strings on that one. So which strings are your favorite? Let me know in the comments, and I guess I'll just play something for you. Trying to think of a good thing to kind of talk about this time. Would y'all rather have like a theory lesson or just like learn a song with me today? Let me know in the comments on the chat, and I will get to you. I guess for now I could play something else. I'm just gonna try to improvise. So I'm gonna use the key of A, and I'm gonna use little chord shapes where I do 2 notes on the D and the G string. I'm just gonna make something up with that. So basically all I was doing with that was I was kind of using a finger picking technique where I'm using these three fingers, my thumb, my pointer finger, and my middle finger. And I'm kind of just using them in different orders. Sometimes I was plucking the two fingers at the same time, the pointer finger. Hey, how's it going? Was that Lady Hannah's? Hello. So, so basically what I was doing there was sometimes plucking them just individually. So like I kind of had a pattern of either going thumb, index, middle, or middle, index, thumb. Sometimes I go back and forth between them. Thumb, index, middle, index is a good pattern. So it's a four note grouping. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it starts over. And then what I was doing was just using notes at the A major scale. Mostly, every now and then I'd hit a G, which is the flat 7, but most of the time I was doing stuff like that. And basically I was just using notes on the strings to form chords. So an A chord has an A, a C sharp, and an E in it. So for the A, I was playing the open A string. And I just decided to double that A on the D string, and that's going to be the 7th fret on the D string. And then I was using the 6th fret on the G string, which is a C sharp. A C sharp, C as in cat. So that's kind of what I was starting with. And then once again, I was using some sort of finger pattern like that. And then what I was kind of doing was coming up with chord shapes based on the scale that I'm in. So once again, this is all using notes of the A major scale. So here I was playing an A and a C sharp. Then I moved this note down the scale. So that's an A moving down to a G sharp. And then in order to make that a chord, I kind of just went what's called a minor third up from there. So this note over here ends up being a B note. And these two notes are really in an E chord, but sometimes I was playing it against the A anyway, just to have kind of a pedal tone going on. So I was using this shape, then I was moving down to that one. But technically it's more of an E chord, so I could have played the E string instead of the A string, but I was just choosing to do it against the A. And then I moved that pattern down 2 frets. So I ended up with the 4th fret on the D string and the 2nd fret on the G string. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking thirds. So an A to a C sharp is a third. If we were going up the A major scale, we'd have A, B, C sharp. So it's the first note of the scale moving up to the 3rd note of the scale. So it's kind of treating those as a chord, like you just play those all together. You have an A and a C sharp, okay? And then I was moving that down. And this is still considered thirds, even though it's not the root of the scale going to the 3rd note of the scale here. Basically, it's the 7th note of the scale going to the 2nd note. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, I'm going 7th note of the scale, 1st note of the scale to the 2nd note. So 7th note to the 2nd note of the scale. And it's the same note, I'm just choosing to play it on the G string instead of here so that I can play both these notes at the same time, have them ring out. But this is kind of a finger style exercise, so it's kind of an adaptation from guitar. So once again, I'm using my thumb to play the A string mostly, and sometimes the E string. And then I'm using my pointer and middle finger to play the D string and the G string. And the pointer getting all the D string notes, or most of them, maybe not all of them. And then the middle finger's getting most of the G string notes. So yet again. And then here I was breaking that idea of thirds. I did a 4th instead here, and then did something else there. Hi Mary Jane, how's it going? So once again, if y'all have any questions, just let me know. This is a little bit more complex theory-wise. Somebody that has gone through the basic ukulele course that I made might understand this a little bit better, that I'm using notes from a scale and counting up the scale, going first note, second note, third note, rather than thinking about the fret numbers. But that's kind of what I was doing when I was improvising that line earlier. Something I could have done to make it a little more interesting, I could have gone down and up with the thumb and then plucked. It's kind of like Victor Wooten's technique, although he does it with a lot more emphasis on each note. I'm just doing it lightly, like I'm going through the string and back up like a pick, and then plucking the index finger on the D string and the middle finger on the D string. So down, up, pluck, pluck. Anyway, that works better on the metal strings. You could still do that on the polyurethane strings, but it's not as clear there. I'm gonna read these chats real quick. So we've got, what is it, Lady Hannah's, is that right? You got your U-Bass a few weeks ago. Congratulations on the U-Bass. Can't talk today. What model did you end up getting? Let me know, because that's cool. But yeah, I'm just basically making chords with that and then moving them all around. Very cool. You got a Kala U-Bass. Which do you know which model? Like this one's the Kala Exotic Mahogany. I have a Journeyman and a Wanderer as well, made by them. Okay, so let's see what's going on. It says, do you mute yourself? I'm not sure. Is there something going on with the audio, or are you talking about the muting technique on the bass? Yeah, let me know if you're talking about... oh, okay. The sound's working now. Well, hopefully it'll continue working. I hope it's working for everybody else. A Nomad, very cool. Yeah, I did a review of the Nomad, and those are pretty cool. They're a lot like the Wanderer. I think they kind of replaced what they were doing with the Wanderer with the Nomad. So basically, they decided that the Wanderer would just start having metal strings, and so they did polyurethane strings on the Nomad instead of having two models that were very similar like that, both with polyurethane strings. Okay, and so then Blaze says, what do you think about the solid body? I really like the solid body ones. I still have yet to do a full-length review on them. I have a couple of short videos where I got to play one at Uke Republic, but I've yet to get one. I'm almost tempted to get a fretless one, because I know I like the fretted ones, and I have a feeling that the fretless ones are going to be good as well. I do think that the solid body, I don't know if you're talking about the newer ones that are more affordable, or if you're talking about the more expensive ones that that have been around for a while. But basically they came out with a new, more expensive one recently too, and what they did differently was they had each string separated out more, so you don't have that problem with the basically the pickup not picking each string up the same amount. So anyways, so that's one solid body that came out kind of recently. But the the other solid bodies that have been around probably for a couple of years now, or has it just been one? I can't remember. Those are really good in my opinion. They're kind of comparable, the ones that are the most similar by a different brand are probably the Flight ones, but I do think that the Kala ones are better, personally. Basically the strings on the Flight one, they started sounding sort of tinny higher up, and the Kala one didn't have that issue until you were really high up on the neck, but the Flight had it a little bit lower down on the neck. I can't remember where it started, but I did do a review on the Flight bass ukulele, but I think the Kala ones are just a little bit better built. So yeah, but the solid bodies, I believe, are pretty darn good. It's kind of fun being able to slap on them and have them react more like an electric bass. I don't really think of it personally as a bass ukulele, because it's kind of more like a short scale electric bass. And what I mean by that is that the pickups are a little bit different. So those have magnetic pickups, and these have the piezo pickup where it picks up the vibration. So those tend to sound a little bit more like an electric bass. They tend to have a little less string noise, not none, but a little bit less, because of how the vibrations are picked up through the air rather than through the vibration of the body of the instrument, or just of the solid of the instrument. Because there's that extra little magnetic thing going on, you might get a little bit less string noise on those. But they aren't going to sound like an upright bass like the bass ukuleles do, and so I think they're just going to tend to sound more like a short scale electric bass. So if you're trying to get those to sound like an upright bass, I'm putting that in quotes because I don't think any of them sound exactly like an upright bass, although I believe the polyurethane strings come the closest. Basically, you could do what people do with an electric bass to get it to sound a little more like an upright. You can mute back here. So like if you use the palm of your hand back near the bridge, you can kind of mute the strings a little bit. And then it's less bright sounding, and it has a little bit more of that upright tone through an amp rather than that really bright sound that you just get out of the round wound strings. But the solid bodies generally have round wound strings. I think they've made some flat wounds for them now, which is good, because if you have a fretless one, you're probably going to want to put flat wound strings on it, because round wounds eventually will dig little grooves into the fretboard. Well, I guess it's a fingerboard because it doesn't have frets. But you know what I mean. That part of the instrument, basically, that frets would go on if it has frets. Anyway. So it's a fretboard when you have frets, and it's a fingerboard on instruments that don't have frets. Like a violin, you call it a fingerboard. So I'm just saying maybe we should call it a fingerboard if it's fretless. But people might still refer to it as a fretboard, and you know what they're talking about. Okay. That being said, it's hard to get either. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm kind of spoiled. I live kind of close to Uke Republic, so I'm not too far away from there. I'm very fortunate on that. So sometimes I can just go down there and check out what they have, and occasionally they'll have ones in stock. So maybe worth checking. I'm not sure where you're from. If you're trying to get something shipped to you, then that, you know, that's something that they do. But I'm not sure if you're in a different country or not. You know, then that might make it different. Okay. So let's see. AC, hello. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But yeah, you have some great questions coming in so far. Keep them coming. Are the flat wound actually flat? Okay, so let's talk about what flat wound versus round wound mean. So with these strings, with the round wounds right here, they're like grooves in it, right? You can feel the grooves. So basically what's going on is you have a core that's this one's probably a nylon core, but you know, on electric bass strings it would be a metal core. So you'd have like a thin metal string, and then you have another string wrapped around it. So on these, the other string that's wrapped around it, you can kind of see this, well, not on this, but Sometimes the string will unwind at the end if you have it sticking out. Obviously I have it sticking down in the hole, but you can't quite see it. But if the string starts coming unraveled on the outside, sometimes you can kind of see that there's an inner core. But basically what round wound means is the string that's coiled around the thin core string is round as well. So like if this is, since this is round, that's why it creates the grooves. It's kind of coiled like a spring around the core of it that's holding it all together basically. And so these are round, so they create grooves. A flat wound string, on the other hand, the one that's wrapped around the other core, so you still have a core, but that's flat. So I wish I could demonstrate it. I'm gonna demonstrate it some silly way. Y'all might get it, but just in case a couple of y'all are a little confused, we're gonna pretend this is the core. I don't know. And then this would be like a round wound string. So I'm gonna use my charger cable here. So if this is round and you were to wrap it around this core, you'd end up with these ridges. Like if it was all close together, you see what I'm saying? You'd end up with ridges there in between where it rounds off over there. Whereas if you took something flat, let's see, I probably have a lot of, this is letting you know how messy my car actually is. So I have a piece of paper here instead. So if this is flat, it's almost more like I don't know if wrapping is the right word here, but if I were to wrap this around here, you could get the grooves to basically be non-existent, right? Because like it's flat, it'll create like a almost smooth surface. It's not perfect, just like the flat wound strings aren't perfect on that, but the grooves are a lot less noticeable, just kind of where the strings, you know, kind of goes along together like that. So when you're moving your finger across it or something, it feels smooth because there aren't grooves. But that's what they mean by flat wound. And flat wound strings are flat wounds. I mean, if they're flat, that's what that means. So it's still, the string itself is still round, like in what's a good word for that? Circumference or whatever. It's still round around the whole thing. So if that makes sense, like the core still makes it to where this is round, even though it's a flat wound. But yeah, it's like the string itself is not like a flat noodle versus a spaghetti noodle or something, but it's the way it's wound is different. So hopefully that kind of helps if you're confused about what flat wound means. But that just means that basically, yeah, like here, you'll get a lot of string noise because those grooves, right? But on a flat wound string, you wouldn't have anywhere near as much of that, and they'd feel smoother. So I prefer the flat wounds most of the time, unless I'm playing unplugged, because when you're playing unplugged, these are a little bit brighter. The round wounds are a little bit brighter, and they project a little bit better, so they're a little bit louder. So if I were playing with a ukulele player and we're both playing unplugged, you might be able to hear this a little bit better than the flat wound strings. Okay, so I think as far as why are U-bass strings so expensive compared to what kind of string? Because if we compare it to ukulele strings most of the time, basically they don't have a core and then something else around them, right? So they're just that one thing, unless you have a low G string, and then occasionally those are a little bit different. But it's just like one little thing, right? So you're not having to have this wound thing going on. So you're not using anywhere near the material. The process of making them is nowhere near as, you know, doesn't have as many steps. But with these have a nylon core, so it's like you basically have a ukulele string in the middle, sort of, unless they have a metal core, but most of these have a nylon core. So as far as an ukulele, I should say ukulele and not ukulele, but same difference. But even with guitar strings, it's the same thing, right? So you have a thin one, and then you have something wound around it. I almost feel like the core is actually also a round wound string on these, which means the core is thicker than what I'm acting like. Because if you look here, it tapers down to this thinner thing, but it still looks like a round wound string which means it might be that there's like a round wound string with another wound around it to make the bigger bass string. So it's a lot more material, and when you coil something, if you were to straighten that out, that would be a lot longer than a string in addition with length. So they have more material. Sometimes there are different types of material. So like these are silver plated, so you know they have a silver plating on top of whatever the wounds normally are, which it has this like copper looking color. I don't think they're copper, but I don't know, some strings are nickel plated, some are, there's like, I don't know, on an acoustic guitar you have phosphor bronze, so I guess there's some bronze in some of the strings. I don't really know what these are particularly made of, but there's different materials that go into it, and then they have the processes of how they wound them. So that's the reason that bass strings and U-bass strings end up being more expensive. Material, extra time going into making them, the fact that you're not making them on as big of a scale because more people play ukulele or guitar than play U-bass. So it's like all of those things combined make them a little bit more pricey. And you know, they're kind of a specialty thing too, so there's probably a little bit extra because of that, but most of it's really just probably the process of making them just costs more, and they still have to make a profit. So I hope that helps a little bit, but that's probably the main reason why. I'm sure that if there's only one or two companies making them, then sure they might charge a little bit extra for that as well. But chances are it's that other stuff. But yeah, hopefully that helps. But there are reasons. And if you were to like, basically when you have a string break, usually what happens is the core breaks and then the wounds come unwound on top of it, right? But yeah, if you were to unwind those the wound part, obviously in order to coil around, it's a lot longer than the string itself. Like here's a good example. Like when you straighten out this coil, it's almost as tall as the pencil, right? It's like 3/4 as tall. But when I wind it around, you know, it only ends up being like maybe a third or a fourth of the length of the pencil. So anyway, yeah, probably enough wound, you know, string winding talk for now. But I hope that helps and hope that makes sense. It's a great question though. There are a lot of little things like that most people don't really think about with the instrument they're playing, you know? They just think strings are strings. But if you think U-bass strings are expensive, don't play upright bass, because upright bass strings like start at $200. And I think that's mainly the same things, right? If they're doing flat wound strings, those are a little pricier, probably because the process of winding it's a little bit trickier. I don't know that, but I would guess it's a little bit trickier. So so upright bass strings end up being like $200 on the low end. Yeah, if you get wound strings. I don't know, gut strings might be a lot more, and I don't know if they do a lot of synthetic things or not. There are nylon strings for some uprights, but anyway, yeah, strings can be expensive for bass players in general, no matter what kind of bass you're playing. Okay. But the good news is they last longer. Like I was saying at the beginning of this video, these are 5 years old and they still sound good somehow. I'm not sure how, but they're a little bit deader than they were, but that just gets rid of a little bit of the string noise. So I kind of like where they're at, even though they're pretty ancient as far as strings go, right? Okay, so yeah, most of that's using two note chords with a drone of the A note underneath it. Cool. Okay, so do you have any questions playing wise? Now that we've answered a lot of things about strings, which really good questions, by the way. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about like different right hand techniques. I have a video on this somewhere where I did like 5 different right hand techniques, but let's just go through some different ones I like to use a lot, playing solo versus playing in a group setting. So if I'm playing in a band, most of the time I'm going to be plucking like this. I either anchor my thumb on the E string, or I kind of let it float up here against the body of the bass, sort of anchoring there if I'm playing the E string. But any other string, I'll like let it sit on the E and pluck the other strings with my pointer and my middle finger. So that's like my normal bass playing sort of technique, right? Okay, and then other things I might do in an ensemble, I might play with my thumb sometimes in order to mute back here. So that means basically that the palm, the edge of the palm of my hand is kind of over here back near the saddle, which is the part that the strings are like wrapped over, and is just on the inside of the saddle. And when I say the inside, I mean where the string is vibrating, not where it goes over the edge, if that makes sense. So it's just on the inside of that, not over here, over here. And the more you move it towards the sound hole, the more it mutes the string to where it's eventually completely dead. Too muted to really hear the pitch. So you just kind of experiment with where to move it to and how lightly to touch versus how hard to touch. And the only thing with U-bass about doing this technique is that the pickup is right there. So if you're moving your hand and you sit it down and pick it up, it's gonna make a kind of a thump or something just being there that close to the pickup. So you just gotta be careful with that. But you don't really have to do that with the polyurethane strings because the material kind of does that for you. So they just have a slight muted sound already, which is kind of nice, which I believe is the thing that makes people think it sounds more like an upright bass, if that makes sense. Okay, Leah says, do you prefer fretted or fretless? That's tough. Most of the time I prefer fretted because slap bass and all sorts of other things, which I haven't gotten to that yet, but I think it sounds better on fretted, although if you hear Les Claypool do it in Primus, it still works great on fretless. I just kind of like that traditional slap bass sound. And then tapping is a little bit easier on fretted instruments to stay in tune when you're focusing on 2 hands, doing all sorts of things. But fretless is fun if you're sliding around a lot. So if there's a song where there's just a whole bunch of, you know, that kind of stuff, then it's more fun to do that on fretless. Okay, so so I like both to answer, but I probably, the majority of my playing is on fretted, so I'd say I probably prefer that. Okay, so we talked about this technique, and I'll get back to the other question here in a second. So we talked about this technique for plucking, then we talked about muting over here and playing with your thumb. Another technique that I use a lot is slap bass. Trying to keep my hand in the picture so you can see it. It's not working too well. So slap bass is generally slapping and popping. Generally when people say slap style, you're kind of doing both of those. So slapping is where you're hitting the thumb off the string almost like it's a drumstick kind of. So it bounces off the string and that causes the string to hit the frets, which gives it that click. So when you do it on fretless, you're getting a more woody kind of thump rather than a click. And that's why they sound different. But yeah, the hardest part there is you're kind of using this motion of the wrist, and you don't want your thumb to go too far into the string or it'll make too long of a contact with the string and kind of like mute it rather than getting the note to come out. So you really have to think about like a drumstick bounces off the drum head and your thumb has to kind of bounce off the string. For me, the easiest way to do that is to pretend like I'm stopping my thumb here, and the momentum will carry your thumb through it, but then it'll immediately bounce back to where your stopping point was. right? So then it doesn't stay on the string too long, and that allows it to kind of have that percussive attack. It works better on the metal strings. You can kind of still do it on the polyurethane strings, but I feel like it is a little bit harder. So just to get a good slap sound out of it. It's still possible though. So there's that style playing, and then you combine that with popping, and basically popping is a lot like plucking. I mean, you're plucking, but you're not plucking upward. You're kind of plucking outward. So it's like your hand is moving out. And what I do is, like, my hand is kind of like a hook. So basically, I pop with my middle finger most of the time. You can do it with your pointer finger too. But I kind of think of it as like a hook. And so then I have my thumb and those fingers basically the right amount of space apart to slap something like the E string and pop like the D string. So I can do octaves. So slapping a thick string, popping one that's two strings thinner. And basically, if you do this motion where you're kind of going in with your thumb and then just moving your hand back out, the pop will happen kind of naturally. So check this out. When I slap, I get ready for the pop by doing that slap, right? And then my hand's already up under the string, ready to go. And then when I lift my hand, it's like I'm really just lifting my hand to get ready for another slap. And I get that pop out of just that motion. So it's very efficient. But you could also slap twice and then pop. So it's not like you have to pop after each slap, but it is kind of convenient that you can set your hand up to where you can pop on the way up without it being a completely separate motion. And I think that's the easiest way to practice getting those two techniques together of the slap and the pop, is just to play octaves. So octaves are kind of like the 3rd fret on the E string and the 5th fret on the D string. So basically it's 2 frets over, 2 strings over. As far as you slap a note, then you go 2 frets over, 2 strings over, and pop the other note. And then you can move that around. So 3 on the E string, 5 on the 3rd fret on the E string, 5th fret on the D string. Then I'm moving up to 5th fret on the E string, 7th fret on the D string. So octaves are pretty easy to play. The hard part with the slap, once again, is just getting that bounce of the thumb, getting your thumb to not like stick on the string at all. So it may seem easy, but if you don't have that idea with the percussive quality of just getting your thumb to bounce, it can be really hard to not have your thumb sit there just slightly too long and mute the note. So that's what makes it kind of hard. Once you get the hang of that aspect of it, it does become a little bit easier. And on the polyurethane strings, if you don't play with the metal strings, popping, you don't want to pop anywhere near as hard. You don't have to do that. Basically, the idea of a pop is when you like pull outward, the string is just releasing and then slapping the frets, right? So that's what's giving it that pop. It's not your actual pluck. It's the release of the note hitting the frets. So that's kind of the thing. But that's what makes it difficult. Sorry, I'm trying to get the chat to come back up. There we go. It's hard on the phone. Let me see what I think it was different people said things. So yeah, sometimes things look easy when they're really not. Getting your hand position right, getting the thumb to bounce off the string correctly, and getting the hooked finger to pop accurately, and then being able to build up speed with it. The concept is easy, but getting it to sound good takes time. And it's really hard on the polyurethane strings to get the E string to sound good being slapped. So, you know, don't get discouraged if it's tricky. That is something that's kind of difficult on the polyurethane strings. And it's also hard if you're on a full scale electric bass. If your action is too high, you have to get more force into the slap. Whereas if your action is lower, you barely have to use any effort. So that's kind of another thing to think about if you have metal strings. Mine's somewhere in the middle, so I have to have like a kind of medium slap. It's not too hard, doesn't really take that much effort. But yeah, the hardest part I think is getting, like, if I imitate it on the body, it's like you don't want to do that and have your thumb rest on it. You want it to bounce off immediately. And so the way that I do that is I pretend I'm stopping a centimeter away. So if I were to do this, I pretend I'm going boom and not even hitting the body at all, but my thumb is loose, so the momentum will carry it through to hit the body, and then it just bounces back to that stopping point that I already had picked out, right? So I'm not thinking about like I'm actually slapping the string. That's not like my target in my brain. It's like just above the string is, so that when it hits, it immediately returns to there, kind of automatically. And so that's why I think when you're getting prepared for the slapping and the popping, if your hand goes in like that, your fingers will hit the strings like it's going to stop your hand here. So these fingers might hit those other strings. But the slap, your thumb will go, you'll keep going just on its own if it's loose. So it's a wrist motion, not a thumb motion. I had another student the other day, and he was able to get a slap, but he was doing it by moving his thumb only, like independently. And it really should be more of a wrist motion, because then you can combine it with the pop instead of having two completely separate motions of the hand. It's more of a wrist motion. Okay, so that's slap and pop. So that's another technique. Sorry, it's getting hot in here now that the sun's out. It was raining earlier. So I apologize for the car noise, but yeah, just got some air going through here. So then that's slapping and popping. We did some muted notes before that, and then we did some normal finger style like you'd use. So let me explain. You'd use all three of those in a band context or in a solo context. You could use both, right? But the finger style thing that I was doing at the beginning, where you're using your thumb and your fingers almost like a guitar player does finger style, that's more of a solo technique. I don't think that you would do that in an ensemble very often unless you're filling in for the guitar player. So like if you don't have a guitar player and you're playing a guitar part, then you might use that kind of finger style playing, but mostly you're going to be doing pointer and middle more perpendicular to the strings rather than this kind of angled thing going on. So those are kind of different in that regard. And then something else that you can do, it's a little bit more of an advanced technique, is tapping. And that's basically, if you're doing left-handed tapping, it means you're able to play notes without your right hand plucking anything, right? So your right hand's just chilling, and you're able to put your finger down with enough force to get the note to sound. And that frees your right hand up to do the same thing. So like I could anchor my thumb here, and then I have this motion. So I can just play hard enough to get other notes to ring out. And then you can combine them. So a lot of people do like more of a Van Halen style thing. You get the idea. I can't play the whole thing on here, just lack of frets really. And I don't know the whole thing. But what I'm doing here is basically I'm pushing down between the pieces of metal like I would normally when I'm playing, but this time I'm doing it with the right hand too. So like let's say that's the 12th fret, pushing down but then leaving my finger down. If I let go, it just sounds like that. But if I leave it down, so I'm pushing down, this is the opposite of what I was talking about with the slap. So instead of it bouncing immediately off, you have to push it down and then leave it down, right? Leave pressure behind it so that the note rings out. Right, so that's what that hand's doing, and then same thing with the other hand. You know, but you can have two things going on at the same time if you wanted to. So this is much more of a solo technique. You wouldn't do this a lot in an ensemble unless, once again, you're filling in for two instruments or something instead of just playing the bass line. Because you could go like, whoops. Whoops. You get the idea. Okay, so that's another idea, two-handed tapping. Yeah, so that's kind of a more advanced technique, because then it's more like playing a piano. You have to have the coordination between both hands to get those two different things going. So I guess this kind of turned into the right hand technique live stream. So do you guys have any other questions that are unrelated to technique or that are related to technique? It doesn't matter either way. So let me just go over the techniques that we covered while you're coming up with your questions. So basically, first we just had normal plucking, where basically I'm just kind of pulling my index finger and middle finger through the strings. If I'm playing the E string, I kind of have my thumb sitting against the body. And if I'm playing the A string, D string, or G string, I have my thumb anchored on the E string so that it mutes the E string while I'm also playing those other strings. Okay, and then we had the muting technique, where you put your palm of your hand over near the saddle, but inside the saddle rather than outside the saddle, right? And then you get that kind of muted sound that almost makes the metal strings sound more like the polyurethane strings. Ooh, sorry, it's getting hot in here. I'm gonna have to roll it down again. Okay, so so that's that technique, muting and playing with your thumb. Well, that's right. I was gonna get back to AC's question too. Let me talk through the rest of this, and then I'll get to that one. Thank you so much for reminding me. Okay, so then after that we had the slap and pop, and then we had I believe just we had that finger style. It's more like guitar playing, when you're using your thumb, your pointer, and your ring finger. It's almost like assigning each one to a string. And then we had tapping after that. We're just pushing down hard enough to have the notes sound on their own. Okay, so after that, that was basically it on the hand techniques that we talked about. Okay, so can you set the U-bass up to have B-E-A-D instead of E-A-D-G? I think you'd have to alter some things, but I feel like it is possible. There used to be 5-string U-basses that did have B-E-A-D-G, I think B-E-A-D-G. And I'm not sure what happened to those, but they did used to exist. And now the more common 5-string approach, I think, is going E-A-D-G-C. And so you're adding a higher string instead of having the lower one. What I would do if you have strings that if you can find one of those sets of strings that still has the B, you know, basically, it's still, if it's going to be a round wound string, you still need to have that nylon core. I don't know if they made that many. I'm really not sure about the 5-string round wound packs. But they did make 5-string polyurethane packs, because they did have a 5-string models. And some of those, just like the string is thicker. So if you're trying to set up a bass that didn't have it like that in the first place, but you're trying to make it have that, you're going to have to make the grooves in the nut wider, or the string won't fit in there. And you're going to have the right kind of string that's thick enough to go through there. Because if you just tune it down to B, if you just took like the same strings, left everything the same, and just tuned them down, they'd be so floppy that you'd have a lot of fret buzz and you'd hear a lot of fret noise as you were playing. I mean, I could try it just to give you an idea. I'll have to roll the window up again so you can actually hear it. But if we wanted to tune and not try to set it up with different strings, how loose do they have to be an actual B? Let's see, this is a B. Went too far. So you see I'm losing, at least like unplugged, I'm losing all the projection of the volume. So, and the string's really loose, so I have to play lighter or I'll get that, you know, fret noise. But yeah. So technically you could just tune them down. It's not the most ideal thing. I think getting a string that isn't so floppy when you tune it down is good. So you might want to find a thicker gauge string. They did make packs at some point, so if you can get your hands on a 5-string pack that was a BEAD G pack, you know, and then just don't use the high string if you want to do BEAD. Yeah, but you could just kind of account for the volume difference if you're using the metal strings. So I guess technically with the metal strings, you could get away with just tuning them down. It's not ideal. Good question if they still make those packs, or if there's still some for sale online. I'd say look for them. And yeah, the main things is just you'd have to size the grooves on the nut a little bit differently, and then you might have to I mean, really, if you're doing the polyurethane strings, the holes on this end may not be big enough to put a thicker string through, so you might just have to alter things like that. Now, there was another question I think I just saw come up. I think it was from Leah, right? That was just like, why would anybody want to tune to BEAD? Basically, there are metal bands, and not just metal music, but often in metal music, people that have it tuned down that low. And so if you want to play those songs, you do need to tune down to be able to play that, right? Okay, I'm back up to E. But yeah, I do think, I'm going to say I do think there might be some issues if you're doing all of them that lightly. If you're doing it on the polyurethane strings, for instance, you're going to lose the pressure that's pushing down on the saddle, so they might not come out loud enough. So that's one issue you might have. Another issue with the metal strings, the same thing, you know, you might just not get as much even pressure on there, so then you might have that problem of one string's quieter than the others. But there are probably ways around it, like having the right string pack, you know. So having the right gauge string where there's actually a thicker string for the lowest one rather than that. Okay, but yeah, yeah, metal music uses tuned down things. Sometimes people like singing lower, so they might prefer like the key of D. If you don't want to just be in drop D all the time, you may want to tune all the strings down a whole step so that your patterns still work. That's another reason that sometimes people will tune down. But yeah, mainly it's just certain styles of music. It's just kind of the norm. So if you're wanting to play music like metal music on the U-Bass, which is kind of fun, like it's different, right? But basically, if you wanted to do that, you have the ability to play those lower notes, and the low notes kind of rumble the room more. So if you have an amp worthy of getting that frequency across loud enough, you can kind of, you know, shake the room a little bit more, so it's a more powerful kind of thing too, I guess, if you want that effect. Which is why metal uses it a lot, and a lot of other genres don't really. Hard rock and metal usually. Okay, so that's basically it. You've got I think we went over 5 right-hand techniques. There are other right-hand techniques. There are also some left-hand techniques. There's way more left-hand techniques, I feel like. Although you could argue we didn't go over the double thump, which is going down and up. We did earlier, but not in the, you know, in the 5 techniques. But you can go down and up with the thumb. Victor Wooten does that a lot. He'll go down, then hammer on, then come up. On classical thump, that's what he's doing. He's going down through the string, hammering on, then coming up. right? So that's what he's doing there. Okay, then yeah, there's different 3-finger plucking techniques, right? So the one that I was talking about that was more like a guitar style, but I think what you're saying is using the ring finger in the normal style. So you're already doing this, but you're adding a 3rd finger in. Yeah, so that's another thing you can do. So basically what you're doing there is just going ring finger, middle, and index. There's a guy, Billy Sheehan, he never breaks that pattern. This is one of the exercises. I'm not saying he never breaks that pattern, but one of his exercises, he keeps that pattern going, but he does 4 per string and then goes to the next one. So it would be ring, middle, index, ring on the E string. Then you're keeping that pattern going. So now you're on the middle finger, middle, index, ring, middle for the A string, index, ring, middle, index for that string, and then back to ring, middle, index, ring. So that's like a way harder way to do that warm-up exercise that I like showing you guys. It's in the course. I'm trying to remember which one it is. Lesson 3 or 4 or something in there. But instead of just going index, middle, you could make it a lot harder and go ring, middle, index, ring, middle, index, ring, middle, index, ring, middle, index. Yeah, it's weird because basically you're doing a pattern of 4 with a pattern of 3 on the right hand, right? So a pattern of 4 per string, but your fingers are doing a pattern of 3. So it's really confusing. But that's what Billy Sheehan did. Other people would probably just do something different. As far as that 3-finger technique though, it is faster. I usually start using that on certain songs if I'm just tiring, like if my index and middle fingers are getting tired, because I can play pretty fast with those. But if you're playing like a song that has triplets, rather than going triplet, and switching that every time, because that's a pattern of 3 with 2 fingers, right? Then it makes more sense to have a pattern of 3 fingers, right? So you can go faster with a little bit less effort is kind of the idea. But yeah, it's still more or less your basic plucking. So it's kind of the same technique. You're just throwing an extra finger in there. I think one thing that's kind of hard about that one is you kind of have to get your fingers to almost be level with each other when you're playing, right? So it's almost like if you look at it from the side, I'm having to curve my fingers a little bit differently to get them to rest where they're almost even with each other, even though my middle finger is longer than my pointer and my ring, right? So I'm leveling them out by the amount of curve I have on the hand and amount of angle I have on the hand too. So that's kind of a tricky part of that technique. But yeah, it's not too bad. It's just a matter of doing it a bunch. It's kind of like if you were to tap your fingers on something, getting them evenly in a row. It's the same kind of thing, only now you're plucking as well. Yeah, that is another approach to the plucking as well. And then I think I said the double thump, you're going down and up with the thumb. I'm trying to think of other truly different techniques. Oh, like Les Claypool and Primus, he'll kind of strum the strings, right? So it's kind of sort of like a guitar player, like a flamenco guitar player or something, where your fingers will go out, but you're just strumming the strings. So you can either do a single strum, or you can kind of fan your fingers out and get kind of that effect. But you could also just like strum up and down like a guitar player. So there's one other right hand technique I'm going to go over, but it's basically plucking. It's just called raking, R-A-K-E. So basically when you rake, you are dragging your finger through multiple strings. So it's kind of like get the angle right with your arm to where you can just kind of, or your hand, like you can do that like a wrist motion like that, but basically you're just dragging through multiple strings. So if I was playing the 6th fret on the G string, 7th fret on the A string, and the open A string at the same time, I could drag my pointer finger or my middle finger, doesn't matter which one. I'm going to use the pointer finger as an example, all the way through each one, with one motion rather than going pluck, 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 right? It's just dragging my finger through all three. So now I'm trying to do it with both the index, then the middle index finger, middle finger. And then a really good example of this is Jaco Pastorius' version of Blackbird. And basically what he does is he starts on this exact chord. He'll drag that finger through the G string, D string, then A string, and then he'll pluck the A string after with the middle finger. And there's not really... Anyway, there's not enough frets on the U bass to do the whole thing, but using that idea is pretty cool. So that's raking through 3 strings and then playing the middle finger after. And if you're wondering, my angle of my wrist is not what I would prefer to tell you guys to do. It's just since I'm trying to hold it up so I'm not like hitting the window or hitting the door frame. I say as I hit the window. Yeah, so really I would have the U bass down a little bit from here so that my wrist angle could be more like this rather than like that while I'm playing. So that's kind of the idea. And a lot of people you'll see, even the pros, I think even Jaco had his wrist bent over like this while playing. It's not really good for your hand. So everybody's hands are different. You can, you know, take a certain amount of that, right? But it's not really good for your wrist. So if you're trying to go for longevity, I would say try not to rest your arm too completely on the body of the U bass. I kind of straighten my arm out and just try to have it leaning lightly against it while I'm playing. It's the same thing as if you're trying to type with your hand like this or something. It could lead to carpal tunnel if you do it on long periods of time of practicing without breaks and without stretching your hands out, you know, all that stuff. So just a good thing to know. The other thing to remember is some of those bass players, like Jaco, you know, they passed away a little bit younger, so they never had to deal with the repercussions of doing that for years and years and years. But there are some people that are just kind of lucky and built different where they don't end up getting arthritis or carpal tunnel, even though they're doing things that really seem like improper technique a lot of the time. And sometimes if you were to watch me play live, you'd see me going back and forth between good technique and kind of moderately bad technique, because you also don't want to fatigue any aspect of it, right? So if you're like wearing muscles out doing the proper technique, but then all of a sudden you do this for a little bit to give those a break, it's not like you're doing that the whole time. So I don't think that if you're watching somebody, that taking a snapshot of their playing and trying to say, oh, that's how I should play all the time, is necessarily a good thing. You just got to see how they play overall, and then decide if that works for you. But yeah, so those are a lot of right hand techniques. I guess we could do a different live stream. I could do the left hand techniques. Left hand techniques, there's a whole lot of things. Obviously we covered the tapping with that. There's harmonics, that's more of a left hand thing. There's hammer-ons and pull-offs, right, that kind of stuff, which is a lot like tapping, but it's, you know, just that hand, not both hands. And then muting with the left hand. So if you're playing a note, instead of palm muting over here like I talked about the right hand, you could touch the string lightly in front of the fret that you're playing. So like, let's say I'm playing the 3rd fret, but I'm touching just past the 3rd fret with my middle finger just to add a little bit of muting. If I move it too far, it'll mute it entirely. But if I move it back towards the other finger, but it's just barely over the fret, it creates a little bit of muting naturally. And that's another thing about how much pressure are you putting down. The downside of doing this is if you're doing that with multiple notes, your whole hand has to move, right? So that you can keep muting. Whereas with this hand, it just kind of stays put when you're muting with the palm. Well, anyway, hopefully that gives you some ideas of kind of what to practice. Mostly right hand techniques, but a little bit of left hand techniques too. Thank y'all so much for hanging out here. I hope I've answered pretty much everyone's questions. I think I got all of them and didn't let any fall through the cracks. But if I did, just feel free to reiterate it here in a second. I guess I'll play, I usually play 2 songs. I usually do the Green Tea as my intro, which was that one's like this. And I play one that's kind of similar that I call Going Camping, because I guess I wrote it right before I went camping or something. But it's very similar. It starts with that same chord. I don't think I tuned before. I'm gonna tune up real quick. Sounds a little out of tune. Okay. But I'll go ahead and play that out. Thank y'all for hanging out here. I try to do this on the first Thursday of each month. The last few, I don't think I've succeeded at all. Obviously this month, July 4th was the first, so I was playing a show that day. And then last week I was out of town. So you never know. It'll usually end up being a Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time or near 7 p.m. Occasionally I can't get the thing to start correctly. Today it took a minute to kind of get it going because YouTube changed some things and I had to adjust to it. Okay. Right. So thank y'all so much for hanging out. Hope you have an excellent day, week, or month. Hopefully I'll be getting some other videos to you guys this month. I know last month I just kind of didn't get anything but the live stream going, so I'm hoping to catch up on some Patreon requests and get some new stuff out there. One of the Patreon requests was a Thundercat song. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to approach that one because there's 2 bass parts in the original, but hopefully I'll be able to kind of get that going. And there's a good Scott's bass lessons on that one. It's the song's Them Changes by Thundercat, where he describes what's going on with both of the bass lines. But I'm still trying to figure out, do I want to do the arrangement as just the bass lines? Do I want to kind of do something where I do a bass duet where one's playing the bass part and one's playing the vocal melody? So I'm just still kind of deciding on that one and trying to figure out what other videos I could get coming your way. At some point I would like to do a full review on the solid body and maybe even the fretless solid body if he has it in stock at Uke Republic. But it's been so long since I said I was going to do that I can't promise anything. So yeah, but just hang in there, and hopefully I'll get some new stuff coming to you this month, or at the very least, hopefully early next month as well. All right, have a great one. I will see you guys next time. I hope y'all are enjoying playing the U-bass or the bass. So I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.